We return to that time of beginning when mountains still remembered being bones and seas carried the salt of ancient blood. The gods had shaped the realms from Ymir's body, but something was needed to hold it all together, and so they planted a seed. No one can say where this seed came from. Perhaps it fell from the void itself. Perhaps the Norns placed it gently in the newly formed earth. But planted it was, in the centre of all things, and from this seed grew the greatest tree that ever was. They called it Yggdrasil. The name itself whispers its purpose. Yg's steed, the horse of Odin, for a tree is the scaffold where Odin would one day hang in sacrifice. In these early days, the tree was young, and it grew as all sacred things grow. Slowly, with purpose, with an awareness that reached deeper than thought, its roots pushed down into the earth, finding 3 places of power, 3 wells that had formed in the making of the world. As they grew deeper, the trunk rose taller, climbing through Midgard, through Asgard, spreading its branches into all the realms of existence. The first root reached down into Niflheim, that ancient realm of ice and mist. There lay the well called Hvergelmir, the roaring kettle from which all the cold rivers had first flowed. But Hvergelmir was not a place of peace. In its depths dwelt Nidhöggr, the malice striker, a great serpent who gnawed perpetually at Yggdrasil's base, his venom dripping and sizzling where it touched. Around him coiled countless other serpents, writhing in the poisonous springs. Yet the tree endured. Even as Nidhöggr gnawed, Yggdrasil continued to grow, to strengthen, to reach upward. This was the nature of the World Tree, to hold both destruction and creation in balance, death and life eternally intertwined. The second root stretched out to Jotunheim and found Mimisbrunner, the well of Mimir. Its waters held something more precious than any treasure, wisdom itself, knowledge so profound that even Odin would one day sacrifice his eye to drink just a single sip. Mimir guarded his well with care. The waters were clear as crystal, reflecting not just faces, but futures and pasts, secrets and truths. Every morning, Mimir would draw water in his horn, the Gjallarhorn, which would one day signal the end of all things. The third root grew into Asgard itself, finding the Well of Urd, named for the eldest of the Norns. 3 women dwelt beside this well, Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld. Their names meant what was, what is, and what shall be. Time itself flowed through their fingers as they wove the destinies of gods and men on their great loom. Each dawn, the Norns drew water from the Well of Urd. This water was white as the clay that lined the well's bottom, pale and pure. Each day they would sprinkle this sacred water upon Yggdrasil's bark, anointing the tree, protecting it, preserving it against the ravages of time and the gnawing of serpents below. Without this daily care, Yggdrasil would rot and wither. The water was so holy that all things which touched it became as white as the membrane within an eggshell. 2 swans glided upon the Well of Urd, and from them came all the swans that grace the waters of the world. And so Yggdrasil stood, nourished by 3 wells. From Hvergelmir came the raw power of primordial water. From Mimir's well came wisdom, deep and clear. From Urd's well came fate itself, the force that held back decay. The trunk rose through the centre of all things, so vast that no eye could see from one side to the other, so tall that its highest branches disappeared into mystery. Its bark was wet with dew that formed each morning. When this dew fell to earth, It became the honeydew that bees gathered, the sweetness that sustained life in all the realms. In the highest branches dwelt an eagle, vast beyond measure, wise beyond reckoning. Between the eagle's eyes perched a hawk called Vedrfolnir, the wind-bleached one. When the eagle flapped its wings, the winds of all the worlds would rise and fall. It saw everything and remembered, storing knowledge in its ancient mind. A squirrel ran perpetually up and down Yggdrasil's trunk. His name was Ratatoska, the drill-tooth, and his purpose was to carry words between Nidugr below and the eagle above. But Ratatoska was mischievous. He embellished messages, twisted them, added insults of his own devising. He would tell Nidugr, "The eagle says you are weak and foolish," then race upward to whisper, "The dragon says you are a lazy bird who understands nothing." The eagle and the dragon despised one another, their enmity fed by Ratatoska's gossip, and yet this too was part of the balance. The tree needed both the gnawing below and the watching above, the eternal opposition that kept the world in motion. 4 stags moved through the branches, noble creatures with antlers that branched like the tree itself. Their names were Dain, Dvalin, Duneyr, and Durathror, representing the 4 winds, the 4 directions. They browsed upon Yggdrasil's leaves, and though they consumed its growth, this too was necessary. The stags were pruning the tree, shaping it, encouraging new growth. More serpents dwelt in Yggdrasil's branches than any tongue could count, representing decay, but also transformation, the renewal that comes from endings. Everything had its place, from the highest eagle to the lowest worm, all part of one vast living system. The tree itself was ash, that humble wood that burns hot and clean, that flexes but does not easily break. But Yggdrasil was no ordinary ash. Its wood was stronger than iron, more supple than any crafted thing. It could not be cut by any blade, could not be burned by any fire, for it existed partly in the realm of the spirit, partly in the world of matter. When the wind moved through Yggdrasil's branches, some said you could hear voices. The rustling leaves spoke in a language older than words, telling stories of what was and what might yet be. Sometimes, in the deepest night, those who sat beneath its boughs could feel the slow pulse of its living heart, the rhythm that sustained all creation. The gods themselves revered Yggdrasil above all other things. They would gather at its base to hold council, sitting near the well of Urd, listening to the Norns, watching the patterns that emerged in the sacred waters. Every day they would ride across Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge, and come to the tree to seek guidance. The gods understood what the tree truly was, not just a plant, but the axis of existence, the spine of reality, the pillar that held up the sky and anchored the depths. If the tree were to fall, all the realms would fall with it. If its roots were severed, the wells would dry, and wisdom would fade from the world. And yet the tree was vulnerable, constantly under assault. Nidugr gnawed from below. The stags fed upon its leaves. Serpents bored into its bark. Time itself wore at its substance. Only the care of the Norns, their daily sprinkling of the waters from Urd's well, kept Yggdrasil strong and whole. This was the lesson of the world tree. Life requires constant care and renewal. Nothing endures without effort, not even the most sacred and mighty. Destruction and creation are always intertwined, feeding each other in an eternal dance. And connection is everything. The roots connecting to the wells, the trunk connecting the realms, the branches connecting earth to sky. Let yourself rest now beneath those branches, feeling their shelter above you. The leaves whisper their ancient songs, and the dew falls gently like a blessing. Somewhere far above, the eagle watches. Somewhere far below, the dragon gnaws. And in between, life continues, held together by the strength of the great ash tree. The Norns draw their water in the morning light. The swans glide on the still surface. And Yggdrasil grows, always grows, reaching deeper and higher, holding all the worlds in its ancient embrace. Before there were gods, there were only two kinds of beings in the void. First came Ymir, the ancient giant born from the meeting of ice and fire in Ginnungagap, the great yawning emptiness. As Ymir slept, his body brought forth others. From beneath his left arm emerged a male and female giant, conjured from his sweat, and his legs, moving together in sleep, produced a six-headed son. These were the first frost giants, the Jötnar, born from chaos and cold, shaped by no intention but their own wild emergence. They were beings of appetite and impulse, as untamed as the storms that would one day howl across the mountains. But there was another being there in the emptiness. Audumbla, the great cow, primordial and patient, sustained herself by licking the salty rhinestones that had formed in the void. Her tongue was warm, her rhythm steady. As she licked, something began to appear beneath the frozen surface. On the first day, hair emerged from the ice. On the second day, a head appeared. And on the third day, the ice gave up its treasure entirely, and a man stepped forth, whole and complete. His name was Buri, and he was beautiful and strong, the first of a new kind of being. Where the giants were wild and chaotic, Buri carried within him something else, a spark of order, a seed of intention. He was the grandfather of what would come. Buri had a son named Bor. When the time came for Bor to take a wife, he chose from among the giants. Her name was Bestla, daughter of Bulthorn. She was wise and fierce, carrying within her the wildness of the primordial forces. And from their union, 3 sons were born. Their names would echo through all the ages. Odin, the eldest, who would become the All-Father. Vili, whose name meant will or intention. And Ve, whose name meant holy or sacred. These 3 brothers looked upon the world of their birth and knew that something must change. The cosmos could not remain as it was, with only Ymir and his descendants filling the void. There needed to be order where there was only chaos. And so the 3 brothers made a choice that would transform everything. They approached Ymir and they slew him. It was a terrible and necessary act, an ending that would become a beginning. When Ymir fell, his blood poured forth in such torrents that it became a great flood, drowning nearly all the frost giants. Only one giant escaped. Bergelmir, who fled with his wife in a hollowed-out tree trunk, riding the waves of blood to safety. From these 2 survivors, the race of frost giants would continue. But the brothers did not kill Ymir out of cruelty. They killed him to create, to transform his ancient substance into something new and ordered. His body became the raw material of the cosmos. From Ymir's flesh, they formed the earth, rich, dark soil that would one day bear forests and fields, mountains and valleys. His blood became all the waters of the world, the seas, the lakes, the rivers that carved their paths through stone. His bones they broke and scattered across the earth to form the mountains. His teeth and bone fragments became all the rocks and stones, from the smallest pebble to the great cliffs that face the sea. They took his skull and lifted it high above the earth. This became the sky, arching over all creation like a vast bowl. To hold it in place, they set 4 dwarves at the 4 corners of the world, north, south, east, and west. There they stood, holding up the heavens on their shoulders. From Ymir's hair, they created all the vegetation of the earth. Trees grew from those strands, their roots digging deep, their branches reaching toward the skull sky. Grasses spread across meadows, flowers bloomed in valleys, and forests grew thick and green. But the skull sky was dark, so they gathered the sparks and burning embers from Muspelheim, that realm of fire, and cast these lights upward into the heavens. Some they fixed in place as stars. 2 of the brightest lights they gave special purpose. One became the sun, radiant and warm. The other became the moon, cool and silver. They placed these great lights in chariots that would race across the sky, pulled by swift horses. But the sun and moon could not drift at their leisure. They needed to move with purpose and speed, for behind them ran wolves. A great wolf named Skirl chased the sun without ceasing, hungry to devour its light. And another wolf, Hati, pursued the moon with equal relentlessness. The wolves never stopped, and so the sun and moon raced in eternal flight, bringing day and night to the world. One day, it was said, the wolves would catch their prey. During Ragnarok, Skirl would finally swallow the sun, and Hati would consume the moon, plunging the world into darkness. But that time was far in the future. From Ymir's brains, the brothers created the clouds that drifted across the sky. These wisps of thought became the bearers of weather, carrying water from the sea back to the land. The brothers then shaped Ymir's eyebrows into a great barrier, a circular wall to protect the lands where humans would one day dwell. They called this realm Midgard, the middle enclosure. It sat safely within its walls, surrounded by the vast ocean, guarded against the chaos of the outer realms where giants dwelt. But the earth was still empty of certain kinds of life. The brothers walked along the seashore one day and found 2 pieces of driftwood cast up by the tide. One was an ash tree, the other an elm. The brothers looked at these pieces of wood and saw potential. Odin bent down and breathed into the wood, giving it the breath of life, the spark of consciousness. Vili touched the wood and gave it the power of movement and the senses, the ability to think and feel. They blessed the wood with speech and hearing and sight, and gave them clothing and names. And so from the ashwood emerged the first man, whom they called Ask. From the elmwood came the first woman, whom they called Embla. These were the ancestors of all humankind, born from trees that had grown from Ymir's hair, given life by the gods who had shaped the world from Ymir's body. Everything was connected, everything part of the great cycle of transformation. Odin, Vili, and Ve were not finished. Having made the world and its inhabitants, they turned their attention to establishing their own realm. High above Midgard, they built Asgard, the enclosure of the gods, a realm of golden halls and shining palaces. There they would dwell with the other divine beings who would join them, the Aesir, the gods who would govern the cosmos. To connect Asgard to the other realms, they constructed Bifrost, the rainbow bridge. It shimmered with all colours, arching across the sky like a promise. The gods could ride down this bridge to visit Midgard, or travel to the other worlds. At the bridge's end stood Heimdall, the Watcher, whose hearing was so keen he could hear grass growing, and whose sight was so sharp He could see for hundreds of miles. Odin became the chief of the gods, the All-Father. He had a throne called Hlidskjalf high in his hall, from which he could see into all the 9 realms at once. He sought knowledge with a hunger that bordered on obsession, willing to sacrifice anything to gain wisdom. 2 ravens sat upon Odin's shoulders, black birds with gleaming eyes. Their names were Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, and each day they would fly forth from Asgard, seeing everything, hearing everything. At night they would return and whisper in his ears all that they had learned. At Odin's feet sat 2 wolves, Geri and Freki, both names meaning the greedy one. Odin himself ate little, preferring to drink only wine, and he would give all the meat from his table to his wolves. Odin had a spear named Gungnir, forged by the dwarves. This spear never missed its mark when thrown, and oaths sworn upon it could never be broken. And he had an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir, the finest of all horses, who could ride through the air and over the sea, who could carry Odin between the worlds, even down into the realm of the dead and back again. The brothers who had shaped the world became the foundation of the divine order. And so the age of the gods began, born from ice and fire, from the blood of giants and the breath of divinity. Let yourself drift now into a time of peace and wonder, back to the days when Asgard was newly built and the gods dwelt in harmony. This was the Golden Age, a time before sorrow had touched the halls of heaven. After the world had been shaped from Ymir's body and Yggdrasil had taken root, the gods turned their attention to building their own realm. High above Midgard, they constructed Asgard. The halls they built were magnificent beyond mortal description, raised from wood and stone, but also from light and intention, from will and dream made solid. Greatest among these halls was Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain, Odin's own dwelling. It had 540 doors, each wide enough that 800 warriors could march through side by side. The rafters were made of spears, and the roof was thatched with golden shields. This would be where Odin gathered the Einherjar, the chosen warriors who fell bravely in battle. Beside Valhalla stood Valaskjalf, another of Odin's halls, and within it was his high seat, Hlidskjalf. From this throne, Odin could see into all 9 realms at once, could watch the movements of every creature. Thor built Bilskirnir, the largest building in all of Asgard, with 540 rooms. Here Thor would dwell with his wife Sif of the golden hair. Freyja claimed Sessrumnir, which sat within Folkvanga, the field of the people. She too would receive fallen warriors, choosing half of those who died in battle, while Odin claimed the other half. Each god had their place. For Seti had Glitnir, a hall with pillars of gold and a roof of silver, where disputes were settled fairly. Heimdall had Himinbjörg at the end of Bifrost, for he was the watchman. Njörður had Noatun, the enclosure of ships, for he was the god of the sea. In these early days, the gods gathered often in fellowship. They met at the well of Urd beneath Yggdrasil's branches, where they held their councils. Each day they would ride out from their halls, crossing Bifrost, and sit in their appointed seats to discuss the matters of the 9 realms. Within Asgard, the gods pursued various crafts and arts. There was a place called Idavola, a field in the centre of Asgard, and here the gods would gather to work with gold. They crafted beautiful things, creating simply for the joy of creation. So much gold did they work with that this age came to be called the Golden Age. The gods played games too, with golden gaming pieces on elaborate boards. The games were serious in their way, but also joyful, filled with good-natured rivalry and the pleasure of matched skills. In this golden time, there was plenty of everything. The gods feasted often, sharing mead and meat, poetry and stories. Bragi would recite verses, and Idun would ensure that all remained young and vital with her precious apples. There was a goat named Heidrun, who stood atop Valhalla, feeding on the leaves of a tree called Leradur. From her udders flowed not milk but mead, the honey-sweet drink that the gods loved. Each day she produced enough mead to fill a vat so large that all the Einherjar could drink from it and be satisfied. And there was a hart, a great stag named Eikthrnir, who also stood atop Valhalla, browsing on Leradur's branches. From his horns dripped water that fell into Fergelmir, that primordial well at the roots of Yggdrasil, and from there all the rivers of the world flowed forth. The gods in this age were not yet divided. The Aesir and the Vanir had not yet come into conflict. Njörður and his children, Freyr and Freya, were of the Vanir, gods of the sea and harvest. The Aesir were the gods of the sky and war, of order and sovereignty. In the Golden Age, these different families coexisted peacefully. The dwarves would come to Asgard sometimes, bearing gifts they had crafted. Light elves from Alfheim would visit as well, bringing beauty and grace. Humans, still new in Midgard, looked up to Asgard with wonder. The gods would sometimes walk among them, teaching them skills and offering guidance. The Golden Age was also a time of learning. Odin sat often on Hlidskjalf, observing, understanding. He would make his journeys to seek wisdom, to the well of Mimir, where he sacrificed his eye, to the roots of Yggdrasil, where he hung to gain the runes. This Golden Age could not last forever, for nothing in the 9 realms was truly eternal except change itself. But for a time, the gods knew peace. They dwelt in their magnificent halls, worked with gold, played their games, feasted and laughed. The sun rose each day, chased by Skjöll but never caught. The moon followed, pursued by Hati but never devoured. And in Asgard, the golden halls gleamed, filled with the voices of gods, who did not yet know that gold, however beautiful, can still be melted down in fire. Let your eyes close now and breathe slowly. We turn to a story of sacrifice and seeking, of wisdom gained through suffering. This is the tale of how Odin discovered the runes, those sacred symbols that hold the secrets of past, present, and future. Odin was never satisfied with what he knew. From Hlidskjalf, he could see into all the 9 realms. His ravens flew each day bringing him news. But seeing and hearing were not enough. Odin hungered for deeper understanding, for the kind of wisdom that lies beneath the surface of things. He had already sacrificed much for knowledge. At Mimir's well, Odin had given up one of his eyes to drink just a single sip. The water had granted him profound insight, but it had cost him dearly. But even this wisdom was not enough. Odin knew that there was something more, something written in the very structure of reality itself. The Norns carved mysterious symbols into wood as they wove destinies. These symbols were runes, and they held power beyond comprehension. They were not mere letters. They were keys to unlock the hidden forces of the universe. The runes existed, but they were not easily found. They dwelt in the deep places, in the roots of Yggdrasil, in the darkness beneath the world. To find them, one had to journey to the very edge of death itself. Odin knew what he must do. He must sacrifice himself to himself, must give Odin to Odin. Only through this paradox could the runes be revealed. He went to Yggdrasil, the great world tree. He took his spear Gungnir and drove it into his own side. The pain was immediate and terrible, but he did not cry out. Blood ran down the spear and dripped onto the roots, an offering to the tree, to the earth, to the forces below. Then he took a rope and fashioned a noose, and he hung himself from a branch of Yggdrasil. He hung there as the wind moved through the branches, as his body swayed gently in the air. He became both the hanged and the god who receives the hanged, both sacrifice and priest. 9 days and 9 nights he hung there, wounded by his own spear, given to Odin by Odin. 9 was a sacred number, the number of worlds held in Yggdrasil's branches. Each day was an eternity. Each night was a journey deeper into the mystery. No bread was offered to sustain him. No mead was brought to his lips. He hung alone, fasting, weakening, feeling his body fail as his spirit expanded. The gods watched from Asgard but did not interfere. This was Odin's path, his choice, his ordeal. As he hung there, suspended between earth and sky, between life and death, his consciousness began to change. The world became translucent. The boundaries between things grew porous. He could see past the surface into the patterns that lay beneath, the invisible threads that connected all things. And then, on the 9th night, as his body hung weak and his mind expanded beyond the confines of flesh, he looked down, deep down, into the roots of Yggdrasil, into the darkness beneath the world. And there he saw them. The runes. They were not written on anything, and yet they were written on everything. They glowed with their own inner light, each one a symbol, a sound, a concept, a force. 24 runes in all, arranged in 3 groups of 8. Each rune was a key, a doorway, a piece of the cosmic puzzle. With a great effort, Odin reached down, not with his hands, but with his will, with his spirit, with the focused intention that was all he had left. And he grasped the runes. He took them up from the darkness and claimed them. The moment he touched them, understanding flooded through him. Each rune revealed itself. Fehu, wealth and abundance. Uruz, wild strength. Thurisaz, protective force and destructive power. Ansus, divine inspiration. Raido, journey and rhythm. Kenaz, knowledge illuminated. Gabo, the sacred exchange. Wunjo, joy and harmony. Hagalaz, disruption that allows new growth. Nauthiz, necessity that forges strength. Isa, stillness and preservation. Jera, harvest and right timing. Awaz, endurance and the axis connecting above and below. Perthro, mystery and hidden things. Algiz, protection. Sowilo, success and life force. Tiwaz, victory and right action. Berkano, growth and nurturing. Ewaz, partnership and movement. Manaz, consciousness and community. Lagos, flow and intuition. Ingwaz, fertility and potential. And finally, Othala, inheritance and ancestral wisdom. Each rune carried layers of meaning. They could be carved into weapons to give them power, inscribed on amulets for protection, cast to divine the future. They could be spoken as incantations, their names becoming words of power that shaped reality itself. But more than this, the runes revealed the structure of fate itself. The Norns used them in their weaving. To know the runes was to glimpse the patterns they created, to understand how choices and consequences interweave. With a great cry, Odin took the runes and pulled himself free from the tree. He fell, landing heavily on the earth below. But he was alive, and the runes were his. He had endured the ordeal, paid the price, and now he possessed knowledge that no other being could claim. The first thing given to him after his long fast was a drink of sacred mead from Belthorn, his mother's father. The mead restored him, brought strength back to his limbs, but he was forever changed by what he had endured, marked by the sacrifice he had made. Odin did not keep the runes to himself alone. He understood that such knowledge must be shared, must be passed down, must be taught to those who would use it wisely. He became the master of the runes, the first to carve them, the first to understand their full power and meaning. He taught them to the gods, to certain chosen humans, to those who sought wisdom with the same hunger that drove him. The runes could be used for many purposes. Carved on a sword, they could bring victory in battle. Inscribed on a ship's prow, they could calm stormy seas. Written on a woman's palm during childbirth, they could ease her labor. Etched on a drinking horn, they could detect poison. Each rune, each combination, each placement had its purpose and power. But the runes were not toys or simple tools. They carried great responsibility, for they could harm as easily as help. A rune carved with ill intent or insufficient knowledge could bring disaster. The power they held was neutral, neither good nor evil, but it could be directed by those who wielded it. This was why Odin taught that the runes must be approached with respect, with clear intention, with understanding of consequences. Some runes were for healing, some for protection, some for blessing crops or ensuring safe journeys. Others were for cursing, for binding, for breaking the power of enemies. The Havamal, the sayings of the High One, would later record 18 rune spells that Odin knew. Spells for blunting the edges of enemy weapons, for freeing himself from bonds, for slowing arrows in flight, for extinguishing fires, for winning the affection of women, for calling the dead to speak. These were secrets, powerful and dangerous, and Odin guarded them carefully even as he shared the basic knowledge of the runes. Not everyone could wield all their power. Not everyone should. The deepest mysteries remained hidden, available only to those who, like Odin, were willing to sacrifice greatly to attain them. The runes became woven into the fabric of Norse culture, carved on stones and weapons, inscribed on jewelry and tools. They were used to mark graves, to claim ownership, to leave messages. But beneath their practical uses lay always that deeper meaning, that connection to the well of wisdom that Odin had accessed through his sacrifice. The story of Odin's ordeal became a lesson passed down through generations. That true wisdom requires sacrifice. That knowledge worth having comes at a cost. That one must be willing to surrender comfort, security, even sense of self, to gain understanding of the deeper mysteries. The All-Father had shown the way. 9 nights of suffering, of hunger, of pain, of dissolution, followed by revelation and rebirth. The tree on which he hung would forever after be associated with sacrifice and with wisdom, the two intertwined like roots and branches. Yggdrasil held many mysteries in its bark and boughs, and the runes were perhaps its greatest gift, pulled from the darkness at its roots by a god desperate enough to give everything for their sake. And so Odin returned to Asgard, carrying the runes within him, carved not just on tablets of wood or stone, but in his very being. He was the rune master, the lord of the gallows, the one who had died and returned, the seeker who had found what he sought in the last place one would think to look, in the depths, in the darkness, in the space between life and death where all true mysteries dwell. We turn our attention to a figure of contradictions, a being who walked the line between helper and hindrance, between wisdom and mischief. This is Loki, the shapeshifter, the trickster, the clever one whose tongue was as quick as lightning and whose mind worked in ways that even the wisest gods could not always follow. Loki was not like the other gods. Though he dwelt in Asgard and sat at their feasts, though Odin had made him his blood brother in ages past, mingling their blood in a sacred oath, Loki was a giant by birth. His father was Farbauti, whose name meant cruel striker or dangerous hitter, and his mother was Laufey, sometimes called Nal, a name that whispered of needles and slenderness. From this giant lineage came a being who was neither fully giant nor fully god, but something in between, belonging wholly to neither world. Loki had the gift of changing his form, of becoming anything he wished. He could transform into a salmon swimming in a stream, a seal diving beneath waves, a fly buzzing through the halls of Asgard, a mare running wild across the fields. This shape-shifting was more than mere illusion. When Loki became something, he was that thing entirely, with all its nature and abilities. It was a gift that would serve him well in his many adventures. He was married to Sigyn, a goddess of loyalty and steadfastness, and they had 2 sons together. But Loki had other children as well, born from his shape-shifting adventures, and these would become some of the most significant beings in all the 9 realms. With the giantess Angerboda, he fathered 3 strange children: Fenrir the great wolf, Jörmungandr the world serpent, and Hel, who would become the ruler of the realm of the dead. But those are darker stories, and tonight we dwell on Loki's cleverness and his peculiar way of solving problems. There came a time when the gods found themselves in need of a great wall around Asgard, a fortification to protect them from the giants who sometimes threatened their realm. A stranger came to them, a builder, who offered to construct a wall so mighty that no force could breach it. His price was steep. He wanted the sun, the moon, and the goddess Freya as his wife. The gods were troubled by this demand, but Loki spoke up with his clever tongue. He suggested they accept the offer, but with one condition. The builder must complete the wall in a single winter, and he must do it alone, without help from any man. If he failed to finish even a single stone before the first day of summer, he would receive nothing. The gods agreed, thinking this impossible. But the builder had a horse, a magnificent stallion named Svadilfari, who was stronger and more tireless than any creature the gods had seen. This horse could haul stones as large as hills, could work through the night without rest. Together, the builder and his horse worked with such speed and efficiency that as winter drew to a close, the wall was nearly complete. The gods grew frightened. They had not truly believed the wall could be finished, and now they faced the prospect of losing the sun, the moon, and beautiful Freya. They turned to Loki, for it had been his suggestion that got them into this predicament, and they demanded he find a way out of it. Loki promised he would solve the problem, and that night, as the builder led Svadilfari out to collect more stones, something emerged from the forest. A mare, beautiful and wild, whinnied from the tree line. Svadilfari, who had worked tirelessly all winter, suddenly had thoughts of something other than stone hauling. The stallion broke away from his master and chased after the mare, who led him deep into the forest. All night long, the builder searched for his horse, but the mare kept Svadilfari occupied, leading him on a merry chase through the woods. Without his stallion, the builder could not move the massive stones he needed to complete the wall. When the first day of summer arrived, the wall stood unfinished by just a small section, and the builder received nothing for his labour. Some time later, Loki returned to Asgard leading a foal, a young horse with 8 legs, grey as storm clouds and swift as thought. This was Sleipnir, born from Loki's time as a mare, and he would become Odin's magnificent steed, able to ride through the sky and across the branches of Yggdrasil, the finest horse in all the 9 realms. Thus, Loki's trickery, born from necessity, gave the All-Father his greatest mount. Another time, Loki's mischief created a problem that only his cleverness could solve. While visiting the goddess Sif, Thor's wife, whose hair was golden as wheat fields and flowed like honey, Loki decided to play a prank. While she slept, he cut off all her beautiful hair, leaving her bareheaded and ashamed. When Thor discovered what had been done, his rage was terrible to behold. He seized Loki and would have broken every bone in his body. But Loki, quick-tongued as always, promised he could fix what he had done. He swore he would journey to Svartalfheim, the realm of the Dark Elves, and commission new hair for Sif from the dwarves, the finest craftsmen in all existence. This hair would be made of real gold and would grow upon her head like natural hair. Thor reluctantly released him, and Loki descended into the underground realm where the dwarves dwelt. He found the sons of Ivaldi, renowned for their skill, and he commissioned not only the golden hair for Sif, but also convinced them to create other treasures. The dwarves, proud of their abilities and eager to show their craft, forged the hair that would grow like living strands, a ship called Skidbladnir that could be folded up to fit in a pocket, yet could carry all the gods when unfurled, and Gungnir, the spear that would become Odin's prized weapon. But Loki, being Loki, could not resist stirring up more mischief. He visited another pair of dwarven brothers, Brokkr and Eitri, and he wagered his own head that they could not create treasures as fine as those made by the sons of Ivaldi. The brothers accepted the challenge, for dwarf pride runs deep. Eitri placed gold in his forge and instructed his brother Brokkr to pump the bellows without stopping, no matter what happened. As Brokkr worked the bellows, a fly came and bit him on the hand. But he continued pumping, and from the forge came Gullinbursti, a boar with bristles of gold that could run through air and water, and whose bristles glowed to light the way in darkness. Eitri placed more metal in the forge and again told his brother to keep pumping. The fly returned and bit Brokkr on the neck, harder this time, but still he continued, and from the forge came Draupnir, a golden arm ring that had a magical property. Every 9th night, 8 new rings of equal weight would drip from it, creating an endless source of wealth. For the final creation, Eitri placed iron in the forge and gave his brother the strictest instructions to pump without pause. The fly came a 3rd time and bit Brokkr on the eyelid, so hard that blood ran into his eye. Just for a moment, Brokkr stopped to wipe the blood away, and in that moment, the work was slightly marred. From the forge came Mjolnir, the hammer that would become Thor's weapon, the most powerful instrument in all the 9 realms. It could strike any target and would always return to Thor's hand when thrown. It could shrink to fit inside his shirt and grow to full size when needed. But because of that moment when Broca had stopped pumping, the hammer's handle was slightly too short, though this did nothing to diminish its power. The fly, of course, had been Loki in disguise, trying to sabotage the dwarf's work to win his wager. But despite his interference, the treasures were magnificent. When all 6 items were presented to the gods, they judged that Mjolnir was the finest of all, for with it, Thor could protect Asgard from giants. The dwarves had won the wager. Broca demanded Loki's head as payment, but Loki, ever clever with words, pointed out that the wager had been for his head, but not his neck, and surely they could not take his head without touching his neck, which was not part of the bargain. The gods, amused by this logic, and not eager to see Loki killed despite his mischief, agreed. Instead, Broca sewed Loki's lips shut for a time, though eventually the stitches were removed. And thus, from Loki's mischief and his attempts to escape its consequences, the gods gained some of their most treasured possessions. There was another time when Loki's quick thinking saved the gods from a difficult situation. Thor and Loki were traveling together through Jotunheim, the realm of giants, and they came to a place where they sought shelter for the night. They found what appeared to be a large hall with a wide entrance, and they settled down to sleep there. During the night, they were awakened by tremendous rumbling and shaking, as if the earth itself was moving beneath them. They huddled in a side chamber off the main hall, waiting nervously for dawn. When morning came and they ventured outside, they discovered that their hall had been the glove of an enormous giant named Skrymir, and the side chamber where they had sheltered was merely the thumb of this glove. Skrymir was impossibly large, and he travelled with them for a time, though his size and his thunderous snoring made him a difficult companion. He carried a provision sack that he offered to share, but he had tied it with a knot that even Thor with all his strength could not undo. This frustrated Thor greatly, but Loki, watching carefully, understood there was more to this situation than appeared on the surface. Eventually they came to Utgarda Loki's hall, the castle of the giant king, and there they encountered a series of challenges that seemed designed to humble them. Thor could not drain a drinking horn, though he drank deeply. Loki could not win an eating contest against a being named Logi. Thor could not lift a cat from the ground. Each failure seemed impossible, for these gods and their companion were among the mightiest beings in all the realms. Only at the end did Utgarda Loki reveal the truth. Everything had been illusion and trickery. The drinking horn had been connected to the ocean itself, and Thor had lowered the sea level with his drinking, creating the tides. Loki's opponent Logi had been wildfire itself, which consumes everything in its path. The cat was actually Jörmungandr, the world's serpent, and Thor had lifted it so high that its coils nearly left the ocean floor. The giant king admitted he had used magic to deceive them, for had he known their true power, he would never have allowed them into his hall. Even Skrymir had been an illusion, and the provision sack's knot had been made of magic that could not be untied. The giants had feared the god's strength so much that they had resorted to tricks and glamour to protect themselves. Loki appreciated this revelation, understanding the giant king's cleverness, recognizing a kindred spirit in the use of illusion and misdirection. Though the journey had been frustrating, it had taught them something valuable about the power of perception and the way appearance could differ from reality. On another occasion, Loki's shape-shifting abilities helped retrieve something precious that had been stolen. Freya, the goddess of love and beauty, possessed a magnificent necklace called Brisingamen, the most beautiful piece of jewelry ever crafted. One morning she awoke to find it missing, stolen in the night, and she was distraught. The gods suspected it was the work of giants, for who else would dare steal from the goddess? Heimdall, the watchman of the gods whose sight and hearing were keener than any other beings, had seen a small seal swimming away from Asgard in the night. He pursued the thief to the sea, and there he found another seal, and the two fought in the waves, each trying to gain advantage over the other. Eventually, Heimdall prevailed, and the other seal transformed back into Loki, who had been convinced by other gods to retrieve the necklace. The story of who truly took it first remains unclear in the mists of time, but what matters is that through shape-shifting and struggle in the sea, Brisingamen was returned to Freya, and she wore it once more with pride. Loki's children by Sigyn were quite different from his monstrous offspring with Angerboda. Nafi and Vali were their names, and they grew up in Asgard, part of the community of gods, despite their father's complicated nature. They represented the possibility that even from one as unpredictable as Loki could come normal, loving family bonds. Sigyn herself was remarkable in her devotion. No matter what Loki did, no matter how the other gods turned against him for his tricks and schemes, she remained faithful to him. She saw something in him that others missed, or perhaps she simply loved him as he was, with all his contradictions and complications. Her steadfastness would prove itself in ways both beautiful and sorrowful in times to come. Loki's relationship with the gods was always complex. He was Odin's blood brother, bound by oaths that went back to the earliest days. He had helped them acquire some of their greatest treasures, even if his help often came after his mischief had created the problem in the first place. He was clever in ways that benefited Asgard, finding solutions to problems through unconventional means. Yet there was always something unpredictable about him, something that kept the gods slightly uneasy. He could be helpful one moment and infuriating the next. His loyalties seemed to shift like his shape, never quite settled, never entirely trustworthy. He moved between the gods and the giants with ease, belonging fully to neither camp, always maintaining his own counsel. The gods tolerated his presence because he was useful, because Odin had sworn brotherhood with him, and perhaps because life in Asgard would have been duller without his clever schemes and silver tongue. He brought chaos, yes, but he also brought solutions. He created problems, but he also solved them, usually in ways no one else would have considered. Let your body sink deeper into comfort now, and allow your mind to drift downward, down beneath the surface of the earth, into the realm of Svartalfheim, where the dark elves and dwarves dwell. Here, in caverns lit by the glow of forges, in halls carved from living stone, the greatest craftsmen in all the 9 realms ply their trade. This is the story of how the mightiest weapon ever forged came into being, and how a moment of imperfection made it perfect in ways no one expected. The dwarves were descended from the maggots that had emerged from Ymir's flesh after the 3 brothers slew him. But the gods had given these creatures consciousness and skill, transforming them into beings of great intelligence and unmatched craftsmanship. They lived beneath the mountains, in elaborate halls and workshops where the sound of hammer on anvil rang like music through the stone. Of all the dwarven craftsmen, none were more skilled than 2 groups, the sons of Ivaldi, whose names were known throughout the realms for their exquisite work, and 2 brothers named Broca and Atri, whose forge burned hotter than any other, and whose hands could shape metal as easily as clay. The tale truly begins with Loki's mischief, as so many tales do. One night, while visiting Thor's hall in Asgard, Loki crept into the chambers where Sif slept. Thor's wife was known throughout the 9 realms for her beauty, but most especially for her hair, which was long and golden, flowing like fields of wheat touched by summer sun, gleaming like honey in candlelight. It was her crowning glory, and Thor loved it dearly. While Sif slumbered peacefully, Loki took shears and cut it all away. Why he did this, even he might not have been able to say. Perhaps it was simple mischief, the impulse of a trickster who could not resist disturbing beauty. Perhaps it was a joke taken too far. Whatever his reason, when morning came and Sif awoke to find herself shorn, her distress echoed through the halls. Thor's rage when he discovered the deed was like thunder rolling across the sky. He seized Loki by the throat, and his grip was strong enough to crush stone. Loki, choking and desperate, swore he would make amends. He promised that he would journey to Svartalfheim and commission new hair for Sif from the dwarves, hair made of real gold that would grow upon her head as naturally as her own hair had grown. Thor released him, but his warning was clear: return with the hair, or do not return at all. And so Loki descended into the underground realm, following the winding paths that led deep beneath the mountains, into the caverns where forge light flickered against stone walls, and the air tasted of smoke and metal. He found the sons of Ivaldi first, those master craftsmen whose reputation stood highest among all their kind. Loki explained what he needed, and the dwarves, always eager to demonstrate their skill and hearing an opportunity to gain favour with the gods, agreed to help. But they did not simply create the hair and send Loki away. The sons of Ivaldi were artists, and when their forge was lit and their tools were in hand, they could not resist making more. Into the fire went gold, precious and pure, and they began to work. Their hammers rang against their anvils, shaping and folding, tempering and refining. First they created the hair, strand after strand of gold so fine and delicate that it moved in the slightest breeze, yet so cleverly wrought that it would root itself in Sif's scalp and grow as living hair grows. But they did not stop there. While the forge burned hot and their inspiration flowed, they created a second marvel, a ship called Skidbladnir. This vessel was large enough to carry all the gods of Asgard with their weapons and provisions, yet it could be folded up like cloth and tucked into a pocket or pouch. When unfurled, it would always catch a favourable wind, no matter which direction it sailed. It would belong to Freya, the god of fertility and sunshine, and it would serve him well in his travels across the realms. And still the sons of Ivaldi continued, for their creative fire was fully kindled now. They forged a spear, long and perfectly balanced, and they carved runes along its shaft, imbuing it with magic. This spear would never miss its mark when thrown, would always fly true no matter who hurled it, or at what target. They named it Gungnir, and it was destined for Odin himself, the All-Father, who would carry it into countless battles and councils. Loki gathered these 3 treasures with satisfaction. Surely this would please Thor and the other gods, and his own skin would remain whole. But as he prepared to leave, his trickster nature stirred once more. He could not resist the opportunity for more mischief, more chaos, more interesting complications. He sought out the dwelling of two other dwarven brothers, Brokkr and Atri, who were known for their skill, but who had always existed somewhat in the shadow of the sons of Ivaldi's reputation. Loki approached them with a challenge wrapped in mockery. He showed them the three treasures and declared that surely these were the finest works ever crafted, and certainly Brokkr and Atri could never create anything to match them. Dwarf pride is a powerful thing, running as deep as the mountains they inhabit. Brokkr bristled at the challenge, and Atri's eyes narrowed. They declared that they could indeed create treasures equal to or greater than those made by the sons of Ivaldi. Loki, grinning, offered a wager. If they succeeded, he would give them his own head. If they failed, he would simply leave with his treasures and spread word of their inferior craftsmanship throughout the realms. The brothers accepted, for they knew their skill, and they burned to prove it. Eitri, the elder, would work the forge while Brokkr would pump the bellows. The bellows were crucial, for the fire must be kept at precisely the right temperature throughout the entire forging process. Too hot or too cool, and the magic would not take hold. The metal would not accept the enchantments being worked into its substance. Atri placed the first material into the forge, a piece of pig's hide, tough and resilient. He instructed Brokkr to pump the bellows steadily, without stopping, no matter what happened. Brokkr took his position and began to work, his strong arms driving the bellows in steady rhythm, keeping the forge fire bright and hot. As the metal heated and the magic began to take shape, a fly appeared in the workshop. It was larger than normal, persistent, and it buzzed around Brokkr's head before landing on his hand. Then it bit him, sinking its tiny mouth into his skin. The pain was sharp, but Brokkr remembered his brother's instruction. He did not stop pumping. He gritted his teeth and continued, and the fly eventually departed. Atri reached into the forge with his tongs and drew forth the first creation, a boar, but no ordinary beast. This was Gullinbursti, the golden bristled one, whose entire coat was made of gold that shone like the sun. This boar could run faster than any horse, could race through air and sea as easily as across land, and its bristles glowed with light that could illuminate even the darkest night. It would be a gift for Freya, a mount worthy of a god. For the second creation, Atri placed gold into the forge, a heavy ingot that gleamed in the firelight. Again, he instructed his brother to pump without stopping, and again Brokkr took his position at the bellows. The rhythm resumed, steady and strong, feeding air to the hungry flames. The fly returned, and this time it landed on Brokkr's neck. It bit harder than before, and Brokkr felt blood trickle down his skin. The pain was intense, distracting, but still he remembered his task. His arms continued their work, pumping the bellows, maintaining the fire. The fly finally flew away, frustrated by its failure to stop him. From the forge, Atri withdrew the second marvel, a golden arm ring called Draupnir, the Dripper. It was beautiful, perfectly circular, inscribed with runes of power, but its true magic lay in its nature. Every 9th night, 8 new rings of equal weight and purity would drip from Draupnir, creating an endless source of wealth. This would be Odin's gift, a symbol of the perpetual abundance that flows from the center of power. For the third and final creation, Atri placed iron into the forge. Not gold this time, but iron, the metal of strength and war, the substance that could be made harder than any other material if worked correctly. This would be the greatest of all the treasures, And Atre's instructions to his brother were even more emphatic. He must not stop pumping, not for an instant, or all their work would be ruined. Broca began again, and the fly returned for its final attempt. This time, it landed on Broca's eyelid, and it bit with all its strength. The pain was excruciating, and blood began to flow into Broca's eye, blinding him, stinging terribly. For just a moment, just the briefest instant, Broca released one hand from the bellows to wipe the blood from his eye. Then his hand returned and the pumping resumed. But that single moment of interruption had been enough. The fly departed, and as it flew away, it changed, lengthening, transforming, becoming Loki once more. He had been interfering all along, trying to sabotage the brothers' work to win his wager. He watched from the shadows as Aitre reached into the forge for the final creation. What emerged was a hammer, but unlike any hammer ever seen. Its head was massive and square, inscribed with runes, capable of crushing mountains. But the handle was short, shorter than it should have been, barely long enough to be wielded with two hands when it should have been a proper, long-hafted weapon. The moment when Broca had stopped pumping had affected the forging, causing this imperfection. Atri examined the hammer with a critical eye, noting the shortened handle with disappointment. Yet as he held it, testing its weight and balance, he felt the power thrumming through it. The handle might be short, but the weapon itself was mighty beyond measure. They named it Mjolnir, the grinder, the crusher, and despite its flaw, it was magnificent. The hammer had been imbued with remarkable properties. When thrown, it would strike any target and then return to the hand of whoever hurled it, flying back like a trained falcon. It could be shrunk down to fit inside a shirt or pocket when not needed. It could be grown to full size in an instant. Most importantly, it could level mountains with a single blow, and no armor could withstand its impact. The Thunder God would wield it, and it would become the protector of both Asgard and Midgard. Loki and the two brothers brought all 6 treasures to Asgard, where the gods would judge which were finest. The sons of Ivaldi's creations were presented first, the golden hair for Sif, which Loki approached her with carefully. When the hair touched her scalp, it rooted itself and began to grow, and Sif's beauty was restored, perhaps even enhanced, for the golden strands caught the light in ways natural hair never could. Thor's anger eased, though he still watched Loki with warning in his eyes. Then came Skidbladnir, demonstrated to fold and unfold, large enough for all the gods yet small enough to carry in a pouch. And Gungnir, tested and found to fly absolutely true, never missing its mark. The gods murmured with appreciation, for these were treasures indeed. Broca stepped forward with his brother's creations. Gullinbursti was given to Freyr, and the god was delighted with his new mount, watching it prance and shine. Draupnir was presented to Odin, and the All-Father understood immediately the value of a ring that would multiply wealth endlessly. And finally, Mjolnir was given to Thor. The Thunder God took the hammer, and despite its short handle, the moment his fingers closed around it, he knew this was meant for him. He gave it a test swing, and the air sang with its passage. He threw it across the hall, and it demolished a stone pillar before flying back to his hand. The power of it made his heart sing with joy. The gods gathered to make their judgment. All 6 treasures were magnificent. There was no question of that. But when they considered which would be most valuable to Asgard, which would provide the greatest protection against the giants who constantly threatened them, the answer became clear. Mjolnir was declared the finest treasure of all. With this hammer, Thor could defend Asgard against any threat. He could battle the giants, protect the gods, keep the forces of chaos at bay. The short handle was unfortunate, yes, but it did not diminish the weapon's devastating power. If anything, it required Thor to fight at closer range, to stand firm against his enemies rather than keeping his distance. Brokkr and Atri had won the wager. Loki's head was forfeit. But Loki, ever clever with words, immediately pointed out a technicality. The wager had been for his head, true, but not for his neck. How could they take his head without cutting his neck? And his neck had not been part of the bargain. The gods, some amused and some exasperated by this logic, agreed that Loki had found a loophole. Brokkr, frustrated but unwilling to break the exact terms of the wager, settled for a different punishment. He took an awl and leather cord, and he sewed Loki's lips together so that the trickster could not speak, could not use his silver tongue to create more mischief or talk his way out of consequences. For a time, Loki walked through Asgard in silence, his lips bound shut, unable to scheme or argue or charm. But eventually, as such things do, the stitches loosened and broke, and Loki's voice returned. The silence had been temporary, but the lesson lingered, though whether Loki truly learned from it remained an open question. And so Thor received his hammer, Mjolnir, the weapon that would become synonymous with his name. He would carry it into countless battles, would use it to protect both gods and humans, would wield it in defense of order against chaos. Its short handle became not a flaw, but a distinctive feature, a reminder that even imperfection can be part of something greater, that the interruption of a moment can create something unique and powerful in ways that flawless creation might not achieve. Breathe slowly now, and let yourself drift into a story of youth and time, of precious things stolen and recovered, of the delicate balance that keeps the gods themselves from fading. This is the tale of Idun, keeper of the apples of immortality, and what happened when she was taken from Asgard. In the golden halls of Asgard, among all the gods and goddesses who dwelt there lived one whose role was more vital than most understood. Her name was Idun, and she was married to Bragi, the god of poetry, whose words could make the stones weep and the flowers sing. But Idun's gift to the gods was more precious than any poem, more necessary than any song. She was the keeper of the apples, not ordinary fruit, but golden apples that grew in a special grove, tended by her hands alone. These apples held within them the secret of eternal youth, the force that kept the gods from aging, from growing old and weak as mortal beings do. Whenever a god or goddess felt the first whisper of age creeping upon them, they would seek out Idun, and she would offer them an apple from her carefully tended store. The moment they bit into the golden fruit, youth would flood back into their limbs. Grey hair would darken, wrinkles would smooth, tired muscles would strengthen. The apples were not exactly immortality, for the gods could still be killed in battle or by violence. But they gave agelessness, the gift of remaining in their prime forever, as long as the apples remained available to them. Idun kept these apples in a special box made of ash wood, light enough to carry, but sturdy enough to protect its precious contents. She was careful with them, counting them, nurturing them, ensuring that there would always be enough for all who dwelt in Asgard. The grove where they grew was hers alone to tend, and she guarded it with quiet diligence. The story of how Idun was stolen begins, as many stories do, with a journey. Odin, Loki, and Hönir, another god often called the Silent One for his reluctance to speak, set out together to explore the world beyond Asgard. They travelled across mountains and through valleys, and as evening approached, they found themselves in a barren region far from any hall or settlement. Hunger began to gnaw at them, for even gods must eat when they take physical form and walk the world. They spotted a herd of oxen grazing in a meadow and decided to take one for their supper. They slaughtered the ox and built a fire, placing the meat in the flames to roast. Then they settled down to wait, expecting that soon they would feast, and their hunger would be satisfied. But something strange happened. No matter how long the meat stayed in the fire, no matter how hot the flames burned, it would not cook. The flesh remained raw and cold, as if the fire had no power over it. The three gods looked at each other in confusion, for this was unnatural, a clear sign that some magic was at work. As they puzzled over this mystery, a voice spoke from above them. In the branches of an oak tree that spread its limbs over their campsite sat an enormous eagle, larger than any natural bird. The eagle spoke with a voice that was intelligent and amused, and it told them that it was preventing their food from cooking, and it would continue to do so unless they agreed to let it have its share of the meal. The gods, hungry and pragmatic, agreed readily enough. What did they care if an eagle took a portion? There was plenty of meat for all. The eagle descended from its perch with powerful wing beats and settled beside the fire. They removed the ox from the flames, finding it now perfectly cooked, and began to divide it. But the eagle's idea of its share was not what the gods had expected. The great bird seized both shoulders of the ox and both hindquarters as well, leaving only the middle portion for the three gods. This was the lion's share, or rather the eagle's share, and it was far more than seemed fair or reasonable. Loki, always quick to anger when he felt cheated or mocked, grabbed a large pole and struck the eagle with it, trying to drive the greedy bird away from the meat. But the moment the pole connected with the eagle's body, it stuck fast, and Loki found he could not release it. His hands were bound to the pole as if by magic, and the eagle, with Loki still attached, spread its great wings and took flight. Up into the air they went, the eagle carrying Loki dangling from the pole, soaring higher and higher. The eagle flew low over rocky ground, dragging Loki's legs across sharp stones and thorny bushes. It flew through forests, whipping him against tree branches. It dipped and dove, and Loki was battered and bruised, his body screaming in pain. Loki cried out for mercy, begging the eagle to release him, promising anything if it would just set him back on the ground. And finally, the eagle spoke again, revealing its true identity. This was no ordinary bird but Thiazi, a powerful giant who had taken eagle form through magic. He dwelt in Jotunheim, in a place called Thrymheim, and he had a daughter named Skadi, who would one day play her own role in the tales of the gods. Thiazi made his demand. He would release Loki, but only if the trickster swore to bring him Idun and her apples. Without those apples, the giant said, the gods would age and weaken, and Thiazi himself could consume them and gain the immortal youth that the gods enjoyed. It was a treacherous request, a betrayal of the highest order, for without Idun's apples, all of Asgard would eventually wither. But Loki, in pain and fear, desperate to be released from his torment, agreed. He swore an oath to Thiazi that he would lure Idun out of Asgard with her apples. The giant, satisfied with this promise, released Loki and set him back on the ground. Loki rejoined Odin and Hörnir, but he said nothing of his oath, nursing his bruises in silence and beginning to plot how he would fulfill his terrible promise. Days passed, and Loki returned to Asgard with his companions. He waited until the right moment, then he sought out Idun in her grove. He approached her with his silver tongue working at full charm, and he told her a tale of wonder. He claimed he had discovered something remarkable on his journey, a tree in the forest beyond Asgard that bore apples identical to hers, golden and beautiful, perhaps even more potent than those she kept. Idun was intrigued, for she took her role seriously and was always interested in anything that might help her maintain the supply of youth-giving fruit. Loki suggested she bring her apples with her so that she might compare them to these new ones he had found. Trusting Loki, for she had no reason to suspect treachery, Idun took her ashwood box containing the precious apples and followed him out of Asgard into the forest beyond. They had not gone far when the sky darkened with wings. Thiazi, in his eagle form, descended upon them with terrible speed. Before Idun could react or flee, the giant seized her in his talons, along with her box of apples, and carried her off toward Jotunheim. Her cries faded into the distance as the eagle flew swiftly away, and Loki stood alone in the forest, realizing the magnitude of what he had done. In Asgard, the absence of Idun was not immediately noticed, but slowly, day by day, a strange malaise began to creep over the gods. They woke feeling more tired than usual. They looked in mirrors and saw fine lines appearing on faces that had been smooth for eons. Their hair began to show strands of grey. Their joints began to ache in ways they had never experienced before. The gods were aging. Without Idun's apples to renew them, time was finally catching up with these eternal beings. They moved more slowly through the halls of Asgard. Their laughter came less easily. Their strength began to wane. Panic slowly set in as they realized what was happening, as they understood that their immortality was slipping away. The gods gathered in council, calling all who dwelt in Asgard to account for themselves. They needed to discover what had happened to Idun, where she had gone, why she had left them to face the creeping advance of age. Each god was questioned about the last time they had seen the keeper of the apples. The watchman Heimdall, whose sight was keener than any other's, whose eyes could see for hundreds of miles in all directions, reported what he had witnessed. He had seen Idun walking out of Asgard with Loki, carrying her box of apples. She had not returned, and Loki had come back alone. All eyes turned to the trickster, and the mood in the hall grew dangerous. Odin's remaining eye fixed on Loki with a gaze that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone to the truth beneath. The All-Father demanded an explanation, and his voice carried the weight of authority and the promise of terrible consequences if Loki did not speak truthfully. The other gods pressed close, their aging faces showing anger and fear in equal measure. Loki, trapped and threatened, confessed what he had done. He told them of Thiazi, of his torment and his oath, of how he had lured Idun from Asgard's safety. The gods' rage was terrible to behold, for Loki had betrayed them all, had endangered the very existence of Asgard by giving away their source of eternal youth. They demanded he fix what he had broken. He must retrieve Idun and her apples, or they would visit upon him punishments that would make his suffering at Thiazi's hands seem like a pleasant afternoon. Odin's wife, the goddess Frigg, offered a solution. She had a magical cloak made of falcon feathers, a gift that allowed its wearer to take the form of a falcon, and fly with a bird's speed and agility. Loki donned the falcon cloak, and his form shifted, becoming a bird of prey, swift and keen-eyed. He took flight from Asgard, soaring over the rainbow bridge Bifrost, heading toward Jotunheim, where Thiasse's hall of Thrymheim stood among the mountains. His falcon wings carried him swiftly, for time was of the essence. Each day that passed meant the gods grew older and weaker. When he reached Thrymheim, fortune smiled upon his mission. Thiasse had gone out to sea fishing, a pastime the giant enjoyed, and his hall stood empty, save for Idun, imprisoned within. Loki flew through a window and found her there, sad and frightened, clutching her box of apples, waiting for a rescue she had begun to fear would never come. Loki spoke quickly, explaining he had come to save her, but they could not simply fly away with her in her current form. She was too large, too heavy for the falcon to carry. So Loki worked a magic, transforming Idun into a nut, small and light, easy to carry. The box of apples was transformed with her, condensed into that tiny form. Loki took the nut carefully in his talons and flew back out the window, racing toward Asgard as fast as his falcon wings could carry him. But Thiasse returned home from his fishing to find Idun gone, and his rage shook the mountains. He immediately transformed into his eagle form and gave chase. The eagle was larger than the falcon, more powerful, and Thiasse was driven by fury at the loss of his prize. He began to gain on Loki, closing the distance with each powerful beat of his enormous wings. From the walls of Asgard, the gods watched the chase unfold. They could see the small falcon fleeing desperately, and behind it, the massive eagle drawing closer and closer. Heimdall alerted the others, and they understood that Loki might not make it back before Thiasse caught him. They needed to help, needed to ensure Idun returned safely to them. Quickly, the gods gathered wood shavings and kindling, piling them high along the top of Asgard's walls. They prepared torches and waited, watching the race across the sky. The falcon drew closer, closer, straining every muscle, pushing beyond exhaustion. Just as Loki crossed over the walls of Asgard, still clutching the nut that held Idun, the gods lit the kindling. A wall of fire erupted along the ramparts, flames leaping high into the air. Thiasse, following too close behind, could not stop or turn in time. The eagle flew directly into the fire, and its feathers ignited. Burning, unable to maintain flight, Thiasse fell from the sky and crashed to the ground within Asgard's walls. The gods fell upon the giant and slew him there, ending his threat forever. Loki landed and transformed back into his usual shape, exhausted from the flight. He released the magic, and Idun returned to her normal form, still holding her precious box of apples. The gods, though angry at Loki for causing the crisis, were overwhelmingly relieved to have Idun back. They gathered around her eagerly, and she opened her box and began to distribute the apples. One by one, the gods ate the golden fruit, and youth flooded back into them. The grey faded from their hair, the lines smoothed from their faces, the strength returned to their limbs, vitality filled the halls of Asgard once more, and laughter returned where there had been fear and sorrow. The natural order was restored, the balance was returned, and the gods were themselves again. Idun resumed her duties as keeper of the apples, tending her grove and maintaining her stores. But after her ordeal, the gods were more protective of her, more aware of how vital she was to their continued existence. She was not just another goddess among many. She was the thin line between eternal youth and the slow decay of age, the guardian of a gift that could never be taken for granted. And though Thiazi was dead, his story was not quite finished. His daughter Skadi would come to Asgard seeking compensation for her father's death, and the gods would have to make peace with her, offering her a husband from among their number and a place in their halls. But that is a tale for another time. Close your eyes softly now, and let yourself drift into a story of beauty and desire, of craftsmanship beyond compare, of the price one pays for possessing something truly precious. This is the tale of Freya, most beautiful of all the goddesses, and the necklace called Brisingamen that became inseparable from her very identity. Freya was a goddess of the Vanir, that older family of gods associated with fertility and abundance, with the cycles of nature and the mysteries of magic. She had come to dwell among the Aesir in Asgard, and she brought with her gifts that enriched all the realms. She was the goddess of love, both tender and passionate, the goddess of beauty that makes hearts ache with longing. She knew Seda, that form of magic involving fate and transformation, and she taught it even to Odin, who sought knowledge from every possible source. Freya had a hall called Sessrumnir, which meant seat room or room of many seats, and it stood in the field Folkvanga. Like Odin, she had the right to claim fallen warriors, choosing half of those who died bravely in battle to dwell in her hall. The other half went to Odin's Valhalla, but those who came to Freya found warmth and welcome, feasting and fellowship in her presence. She had many treasures. She owned a cloak made of falcon feathers, a magical garment that allowed its wearer to transform into a falcon and fly swift as thought across the realms. She would sometimes lend this cloak to others, to Loki when he needed to rescue Idun, to any who had legitimate need and asked respectfully. She was generous with what she possessed, for true abundance flows outward rather than hoarding itself. Freya travelled in a chariot pulled by two cats, large and powerful creatures quite unlike the small house cats that humans kept. These were magical beasts, strong enough to draw her chariot across the sky, devoted to their mistress, moving with grace and silence when needed, or with fierce power when speed was required. They were grey as storm clouds, and their eyes held an intelligence that suggested they understood far more than ordinary animals. She also possessed a boar named Hildisvini, whose name meant battle swine. This boar had bristles of gold, though different from Freya's boar Gullinbursti, and it served as her mount on certain journeys. The boar was actually one of her devotees transformed, a man named Otter, whom she had changed to this shape to help him in a quest, showing her willingness to aid those who honoured her. But of all her possessions, one stood above all others in beauty and significance. This was Brisingamen, the necklace of the Brisings, and the story of how she acquired it reveals much about her nature, her determination, her understanding of value and exchange, her willingness to pay any price for what she truly desired. One day, Freya was wandering far from Asgard, exploring the realms as she sometimes did, for she loved beauty wherever it could be found and sought it constantly. Her path took her toward a rocky region where the dwarves dwelt, those master craftsmen who lived beneath the mountains in halls carved from living stone, lit by forge fire and glowing with the heat of creation. She came upon a dwelling, a workshop built into the side of a hill, and through a crack in the door, a light gleamed. Not the red glow of ordinary fire, but a golden radiance that seemed to pulse with its own life. Curious, drawn by that beautiful light, Freya approached the door. She found it slightly ajar, as if inviting her to enter, or perhaps simply left open in the carelessness of craftsmen absorbed in their work. She slipped inside, moving quietly, and what she saw made her breath catch in her throat. 4 dwarves were working at a forge, and they were putting the finishing touches on a necklace, unlike anything Freya had ever seen. It was made of gold, but not ordinary gold. This metal seemed to capture light and transform it, to glow with an inner fire that outshone even the forge flames. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, beyond anything even the dwarves typically achieved. Each link was perfect, each curve and angle precisely calculated to catch the light and reflect it in ever-changing patterns. The necklace seemed alive, seemed to possess consciousness of its own beauty, and it radiated a power that was both aesthetic and magical. The 4 dwarves were brothers, their names recorded in some tales as Alfrig, Dvalin, Burling, and Greer. They were among the finest craftsmen of their race, and this necklace represented their masterwork, the culmination of skill passed down through countless generations of dwarven smiths. They had poured into it not just their technical ability, but something of their very essence, their love of beauty and perfection. Freya stood transfixed, unable to look away from the necklace. She had seen many beautiful things in her long life: the golden halls of Asgard, the shimmer of Bifrost, the stars scattered across the night sky. But this necklace surpassed them all. It was beauty concentrated, distilled into physical form, and she wanted it with a desire that went beyond mere covetousness into something approaching need. She stepped forward, revealing her presence, and the 4 dwarves turned to look at her. Even they, craftsmen accustomed to creating beautiful things, caught their breath at the sight of Freya, for she was the goddess of beauty itself, and her presence filled the workshop with a radiance that rivaled even Brisingamen's glow. Freya spoke, and her voice was honey and music combined. She praised their work, acknowledging the skill and artistry they had demonstrated. She told them the necklace was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, and she asked if she might purchase it from them. She offered gold and silver, treasures from Asgard's abundant stores, whatever price they might name. But the dwarves looked at one another, and a strange expression passed between them. They had not made this necklace to sell. They had created it for themselves, for the simple joy of making something perfect, something that would endure as testimony to their craft. Gold and silver they had in abundance, mined from the deep places of the earth. Treasures from Asgard held little attraction for them, for they were the source of most such treasures anyway. One of the brothers spoke, his voice rough but not unkind. He told Freya that the necklace was not for sale, not for any amount of treasure she could offer. The goddess felt her heart sink, felt the ache of desire unfulfilled. But she did not leave. She could not. The necklace called to her, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was meant to possess it, that without it she would never be complete. She asked what price they would accept, if not gold or silver. What did they desire that she could provide? The 4 dwarves conferred among themselves in their own language, voices low, glances occasionally flicking toward the goddess, who waited with barely concealed hope and longing. Finally, they turned back to her with their answer. The price they named was unusual, personal, and they delivered it without embarrassment or apology. They would give her the necklace if she would spend one night with each of them. 4 nights in total, sharing their beds as a lover shares the darkness with her beloved. The request was bold, perhaps even presumptuous, asking a goddess to lie with dwarves, beings considered lesser in the hierarchy of creation. But the dwarves understood value in their own terms. They could make gold into any form they wished, but they could not compel love or desire, could not purchase the company of the most beautiful being in all the realms. This was something truly rare, truly valuable to them. Freya considered their offer. She understood that they were not seeking to demean her or to take advantage. This was an exchange, offered openly and honestly. They possessed something she desperately wanted, and they were naming their price. She could refuse and leave, keeping her dignity perhaps, but losing Brisingamen forever. Or she could accept their terms and possess the necklace that seemed to call her name in a voice only she could hear. She looked again at the necklace, at the way it caught the forge light and transformed it into something transcendent. She thought about beauty and desire, about value and price, about the nature of exchange, and she made her choice. Freya agreed to their terms. She would spend 1 night with each of the 4 brothers, giving them what they asked, receiving in return what she desired above all things. There was no shame in her acceptance, for she understood something that others might not, that all things of value require payment, that beauty commands its price, that desire unfulfilled is its own kind of death. 4 nights she spent in the dwarves' hall beneath the mountain. What passed between them during those nights is not recorded in detail, for some things remain private even in the oldest tales. But when the 4th dawn came, the dwarves kept their word. They clasped Brisingamen around Freya's neck, and the moment it settled against her skin, it seemed to fuse with her, to become part of her in a way that went beyond mere wearing. The necklace transformed her, or perhaps it simply revealed what had always been true. It enhanced her beauty, made her even more radiant than before, added to her power and presence. She looked at her reflection in the still water of an underground pool and saw herself as she was truly meant to be. The goddess of beauty adorned with beauty's perfect expression. Freya thanked the dwarves and left their hall, making her way back to Asgard with her new treasure. She wore it constantly from that day forward, never removing it, for it had become as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. When others saw her wearing Brisingamen, they gasped at its beauty, at the way it seemed to glow against her skin, at the perfection of the combination of goddess and necklace. But not everyone was pleased by Freya's acquisition. Loki, ever watchful, ever curious about the affairs of others, learned of her journey to the dwarves and the price she had paid. He went to Odin, perhaps motivated by mischief, perhaps by some darker impulse, and he told the All-Father what Freya had done to obtain the necklace. Odin's response to this news was complex. Some say he was offended by Freya's actions, seeing them as undignified for a goddess. Others suggest he was simply testing her, wanting to see how much the necklace truly meant to her. Whatever his motivation, he commanded Loki to steal Brisingamen and bring it to him. Loki accepted this task, though even he hesitated before attempting to steal from Freya, who was powerful in ways that went beyond physical strength. He waited until she slept in her hall Sessrumnir, then crept in using his skills of stealth and cunning. But Freya, even in sleep, held the necklace close, and the door to her chamber was locked from within, Loki transformed himself into a fly, small enough to slip through the tiniest gap. He found a space near the roof where the walls met, squeezed through, and flew into Freya's chamber. She lay sleeping, and around her neck, Brisingamen gleamed softly in the darkness. But the clasp was beneath her neck, pressed against the bed, impossible to reach without waking her. With infinite patience, Loki took the form of a flea and bit Freya just enough to make her shift in her sleep. She turned slightly, and the clasp became accessible. Loki returned to his own form, gently undid the clasp, and removed the necklace. Then he fled from the chamber, from Sessrumnir, and brought Brisingamen to Odin as commanded. When Freya woke and found the necklace gone, her anguish was terrible. She knew immediately that this was no ordinary theft, and she confronted Odin directly, demanding the return of her property. The All-Father agreed to return it, but with a condition. She must cause a war between two mortal kings, must use her influence to keep them fighting eternally, each side's dead warriors rising each day to fight again. This was a strange and dark request, and some versions of the tale say Freya refused, while others say she reluctantly agreed to a limited version of the curse. The details vary, but what remains consistent is that Odin eventually returned Brisingamen to her. Perhaps he simply wanted to test her devotion to it, or perhaps he sought to remind her that even gods must sometimes pay prices they would rather not pay. From that day forward, Freya guarded her necklace more carefully, but she never stopped wearing it. It had cost her much to obtain, and she valued it not despite that cost, but because of it. Things gained easily are easily lost, easily forgotten. But Brisingamen had required sacrifice, had demanded payment in the currency of self, and that made it precious beyond measure. The necklace became one of Freya's symbols, recognized throughout the 9 realms. When people spoke of her, they spoke of her beauty and her necklace in the same breath, as if the two could not be separated. And in truth, they could not. Freya was beauty, and Brisingamen was beauty's crown, and together they represented something fundamental about the nature of desire and the price of perfection. Let your breathing slow and deepen now, as we follow a tale of necessity and transformation, of promises made and prices paid. This is the story of how the greatest of all horses came into being, born from trickery and desperation, from Loki's shape-shifting nature and the needs of Asgard. It is the story of Sleipnir, the 8-legged steed who would carry Odin between the worlds. In the early days of Asgard, after the gods had built their halls and settled into their realm, they began to see the need for better defences. The giants dwelt in Jotunheim beyond the borders of the gods' domain, and though there was not yet open war between them, there was tension, mistrust, the memory of Ymir's death hanging between the two peoples, like an unspoken accusation. The gods wanted a wall, a fortification mighty enough to withstand any assault, high enough and strong enough that even the most powerful giants could not breach it. But building such a wall would require immense labour and time, resources the gods were reluctant to spare when there were so many other tasks demanding their attention. It was during this time of uncertainty that a stranger came to Asgard. He arrived at the beginning of winter, riding alone, and he sought an audience with the gods. He was a builder, he said, a craftsman of extraordinary skill, and he had a proposal that would solve their problems. The stranger offered to build them a wall around Asgard, a fortification so perfect that it would make their realm completely safe from giants and any other threat. The wall would be tall and thick, constructed from stone blocks fitted so precisely that not even a knife blade could slip between them. It would be a masterwork, he promised, a structure that would stand for all time. The gods were interested, for this was exactly what they needed. But they grew cautious when the builder named his price. He wanted 3 things in payment for his labor: the sun that lit the sky each day, the moon that illuminated the night, and the goddess Freya to be his wife. The demand was outrageous, impossible to accept. To give away the sun and moon would plunge all the realms into darkness, ending the cycle of day and night, destroying the crops that fed humanity, disrupting the very order of creation. And Freya was not property to be bargained away, but a goddess of power and importance, a being unto herself who could not simply be handed over like a piece of gold. The gods would have dismissed the builder immediately, but Loki, ever quick to see opportunities in difficult situations, spoke up before they could refuse outright. He suggested they accept the offer, but with conditions that would make the task impossible to complete. Let the builder have his chance, Loki proposed, but he must finish the entire wall before the first day of summer. Not a single stone could remain unplaced. Not a single gap could exist when that deadline arrived, and he must do it alone, without help from any man. The gods considered Loki's suggestion. The time he proposed was short, only the span of a single winter, and the work was immense. No one could possibly complete such a wall alone in that time, they thought. They would get at least a substantial portion of their fortification built at no cost, and when the deadline passed, they would owe the builder nothing. After some discussion, they agreed to Loki's terms. The builder could attempt his task under these conditions, but with one modification. They would allow him to use his horse to help with the labor. Animals, they reasoned, were not men, and allowing a beast of burden seemed a small concession that would not affect the impossibility of completing the task in time. The builder accepted these terms with a calm that should perhaps have warned them. He had a horse, he said, a stallion named Svadilfari, and with this horse's help, he would build their wall. The gods agreed, oaths were sworn, and the work began the very next day, on the first day of winter. Svadilfari was no ordinary horse. He was massive, powerful beyond any beast the gods had encountered. His strength was almost supernatural, his endurance seemingly limitless. The stallion could haul stones as large as small houses, could work through the night without rest, could find and transport rocks that would have required teams of oxen to move. The builder worked with focused intensity, and his horse worked alongside him with equal dedication. Together, they quarried enormous blocks of stone, shaped them, hauled them to Asgard, and set them in place. The wall began to rise, growing steadily day by day, and its construction was everything the builder had promised. Perfect craftsmanship, stones fitted seamlessly together, a structure of immense strength and beauty. Winter passed, and the wall continued to grow. The gods watched with increasing unease, for the work was progressing far faster than they had anticipated. What they had assumed would be impossible was proving merely difficult. And even that difficulty was being overcome by the tireless labour of Svadilfari. As winter drew toward its close, as the days began to lengthen and the first hints of spring touched the air, the wall stood nearly complete. Only the gateway remained unfinished. Only a small section of stonework needed to be placed, and 3 days still remained before the first day of summer when the deadline would arrive. The gods gathered in emergency council, and their mood was grim. They had been outmaneuvered, tricked into an agreement they had thought was safe. Unless something changed dramatically, the builder would complete his task, and they would owe him his terrible price. The sun would be lost, the moon would be taken, and Freya would be forced into an unwanted marriage. Freya herself was furious, her anger blazing like wildfire. She had not agreed to be used as payment, had not consented to this arrangement, and she would not go quietly if they tried to enforce it. The other gods felt the weight of their mistake, the foolishness of their assumptions. They turned to Loki, for it had been his suggestion that led them into this predicament. He had promised them that the task would be impossible, that they would benefit from the arrangement at no cost. Now he must find a way to prevent the wall's completion, to break the agreement without breaking their oaths, to save them from the consequences of their own poor judgment. Loki understood that his own future, perhaps his very life, depended on solving this problem. The god's anger was focused on him, and rightly so. He had been clever when caution was needed, had been glib when wisdom was required. Now he must use that same cleverness to undo what he had done. He thought carefully, looking for the weak point in the situation, the thread he could pull to unravel the whole design. The builder himself was formidable, working with skill and determination that suggested he might be more than an ordinary man. But Svadilfari, the horse, was the key. Without the stallion's supernatural strength and endurance, the builder could never finish the remaining work in 3 days. Loki formed a plan, one that would require a sacrifice of a very personal nature. He would need to use his shape-shifting abilities, his power to transform into any creature he could imagine, and he would need to appeal to the one thing that could distract even the most dedicated work animal, the call of nature, of instinct, of desire that overrides duty. As the sun set on that evening, 3 days before summer, the builder led Svadilfari out from the partially built gateway to collect more stones. The stallion was tired, but still willing, still focused on his task, his great muscles rippling as he walked beside his master. From the forest at the edge of the construction site, a sound emerged, a whinny, high and clear, unmistakably female. The builder paused, and Svadilfari's head came up, his ears pricking forward. Another whinny came, and from between the trees stepped a mare. She was beautiful, this mare, her coat gleaming in the twilight, her movements graceful and inviting. She whinnied again, a sound of greeting and invitation, and she took a few steps towards Svadilfari before turning and moving back toward the forest, looking over her shoulder as if to say, "Follow me." Svadilfari, who had worked tirelessly for an entire winter, who had never once faltered or refused or slowed in his labour, suddenly had thoughts of something other than stone hauling. The mare was calling him, and every instinct in his being responded to that call. He took a step toward her, then another. The builder realised what was happening and grabbed for his horse's bridle, but Svadilfari was already moving, pulling away from his master's grip. The stallion broke into a trot, then a canter, then a full gallop, chasing after the mare who danced just ahead of him, always near enough to be tantalisingly close, but never quite near enough to catch. The builder ran after them, calling to his horse, commanding and pleading in equal measure. But the mare led Svadilfari deep into the forest, winding through trees, leaping over streams, running through clearings, and the stallion followed with single-minded determination, completely focused on the chase. All through that night, the mare led Svadilfari on a wild pursuit through the wilderness. Whenever the stallion came close, she would put on a burst of speed and pull ahead. Whenever he seemed ready to give up and return to his master, she would slow and call to him, and the chase would resume. She was tireless, clever, keeping him engaged and moving, always moving, never allowing him to rest or return to the task of wall building. The builder searched through the night, calling for his horse, but the forest was vast and dark, and the mare knew every hidden path and secret dell. Dawn came, and the stallion had not returned. The first of the 3 remaining days was lost to the chase. The second night came, and still the mare kept Svadilfari occupied, leading him to places far from Asgard, exhausting him with running and courting, with the ancient dance between mare and stallion that no amount of duty or training could overcome. The builder, frantic now, continued his search, but without his horse, he could not move the massive stones that remained to be placed. The 3rd day arrived, the last before summer, and Svadilfari finally broke away from the mare's spell and returned to his master. The stallion was exhausted, sweating, barely able to stand after 2 nights and days of relentless chase. The builder managed to move a few stones, working frantically, but it was hopeless. Too much remained to be done, and there were only hours left before the deadline. When the first day of summer arrived with its dawn, the wall stood magnificent but incomplete. The gateway remained unfinished, several stones still lying where they would have been placed if only there had been time. The builder had failed to meet the terms of the agreement, missed by only a small amount of work, but missed nonetheless. The builder's rage was terrible to behold. He stormed into Asgard, demanding payment anyway, claiming that he had been sabotaged, that the gods had interfered with his work. And in his anger, his true nature revealed itself. He grew larger, his skin taking on the grey colour of stone, his strength multiplying. He was no mere builder, but a giant in disguise, a rock giant who had sought to trick the gods as thoroughly as they had sought to trick him. Thor arrived then, returning from a journey to the east where he had been fighting trolls. He saw the giant threatening the gods, heard the story of what had transpired, and his response was swift and violent. He drew Mjolnir and struck the giant down with a single blow, ending both the threat and the builder's demands for payment. The wall stood as it was, nearly complete, a testament to remarkable craftsmanship, but also to the narrow escape the gods had experienced. They had their fortification, or most of it, and they had kept the sun and moon and Freya's freedom. But the situation had been dangerously close to disaster. Sometime later, Loki returned to Asgard. He had been absent since that night when the mare had appeared, had not been seen during the final days of the wall's construction or during the confrontation with the giant. When he arrived, he was leading a foal. This foal was unlike any horse that had ever been seen. He was grey as storm clouds, and he had 8 legs, 4 more than any normal horse should possess. He was young, but already showed signs of the extraordinary nature he would possess when fully grown. He could walk up walls, could move with uncanny speed and grace, could navigate any terrain without difficulty. Loki offered this foal to Odin as a gift, making no excuse and providing no detailed explanation. But the truth was understood by all who saw the young horse. Loki had been the mare who led Svadilfari astray, had taken that form and given himself to the stallion to distract him from his work. And from that union, from those 2 nights and days in the forest, this 8-legged foal had been conceived and born. The gods received this gift with mixed feelings. The circumstances of the horse's birth were strange, even disturbing, another example of Loki's willingness to do whatever was necessary to achieve an end, regardless of how it affected him personally or how unusual the method might be. Yet the foal himself was magnificent, blameless in his origins, and clearly destined for greatness. Odin accepted the young horse and named him Sleipnir, which meant the slipper, or the one who glides. As Sleipnir grew, he became the finest of all horses in all the 9 realms. He could run faster than the wind, could gallop through the air as easily as across the ground, could carry Odin down the roads that led to Hel's realm and back again, could travel along the branches of Yggdrasil itself. Sleipnir became Odin's constant companion, his mount in journeys both physical and mystical. When the All-Father rode forth from Asgard, it was on Sleipnir's back, the 8-legged horse carrying him swiftly and surely wherever he needed to go. The horse could cross the Rainbow Bridge Bifrost without making it tremble, could traverse the space between worlds with ease. In battle, Sleipnir was fearless, carrying Odin into the thick of combat without hesitation. In peacetime, he was a symbol of Odin's power and authority, recognized throughout all the realms as the steed of the All-Father. His 8 legs gave him stability and speed that no 4-legged horse could match, allowed him to navigate terrain that would defeat ordinary mounts. And so, from Loki's most personal sacrifice, from his willingness to transform himself completely and give himself to another being in a form not his own, came one of the greatest gifts the gods ever received. Sleipnir was Loki's son, born of his body in mare form, and yet he became Odin's possession, serving the leader of the gods with perfect loyalty and strength. The story illustrated something fundamental about Loki's nature. He could create as well as destroy, could give as well as take, could solve problems through methods that others would never consider or dare attempt. His gift to the gods was strange, yes, but it was also invaluable, a treasure born from necessity and sacrifice. And so our journey through these ancient tales comes to a gentle close for now. The stories of the Norse gods will continue, waiting in the mists of time, ready to be told again when you return.